Hello again. Let's get started, shall we? The key to making a lot of the interactions that we will be exploring throughout this course is the trigger object. There is one included in the Elements of Game Design course library. Let's pull it out and have a look. Now we can see that there are some settings here to change how the trigger operates. We'll explore what exactly all of these inputs do in a little bit. First, you might notice that there is no physical representation of the trigger in 3D space. If we want to be able to see where the trigger is and move it around, we'll have to connect the trigger to a 3D object. So I'm going to click on the Sphere Primitive button in the bottom toolbar and click in the 3D view to create a sphere. I'll right-click to deactivate the tool. I'm going to find the sphere object in the LE and click on the Default tab. The sphere looks a little big to me, so I'm just going to set the radius to 0.25. I'll zoom in a little here so we can see the sphere better. Now this sphere is only serving as a visual representation of where the trigger is, so we really don't need the mesh to be so dense. So I'm going to set the latitude and longitude to 5. That should be good. Now I'm going to right-click in the 3D view to go into point edit mode. I'm not actually going to do any point editing, I'm just doing this to flatten or finalize the mesh. Now the properties for the sphere no longer have any effect. You don't have to flatten the mesh if you don't want to, I just prefer it that way myself. I'm going to click on the Expanded View tab on the sphere object. This will let me see every input and output on the object. Now we can see the world matrix output for the sphere. If you notice, the trigger has a matrix input. The matrix inputs and outputs on objects contain all of the location, rotation, and scale parameters of that object. The trigger gets its location from its matrix input. So if we left-click drag on the world matrix output on the sphere object, we can link it into the matrix input on the trigger. Now the trigger shares the same location as the sphere. So if we move the sphere around, the trigger will move as well. We now can see where the trigger is located in 3D space. We could actually link any object's world matrix into the trigger to attach the trigger to that object. This way works good, but it would be a little cleaner in the LE if we connect the trigger inside of the sphere object instead. So I'll just click on the link to disconnect it and delete the trigger object. Now I'll click on the orange button on the top of the sphere object to enter it. I'll pull a new trigger object into the LE. Here we can see an object named Transform. This object has the matrix inputs and outputs for the 3D object. All 3D objects have the Transform object inside. We can see that the world matrix on the Transform object is exported to the outside. So the world matrix on the Transform object is the same world matrix that we used to connect the trigger on the outside of the sphere. So we can use the same output here on the inside. Now we have the trigger connected up inside of the sphere object. It works just the same. Wherever we move the sphere is where the trigger will be. So now we've got a good visual representation of the trigger in 3D space. This will make it possible to place the trigger where we want in the scene. I'm just going to center the sphere in the scene using the info panel here, and I'll zoom in a bit so we can see it. Now the only downside to having the trigger inside of the sphere object is that we have to go into the sphere object to change any of the parameters for the trigger. We're going to want to export those parameters to the outside of the sphere object so that we don't have to go digging in here to make adjustments. Meet me in the next video and we'll finish setting up the trigger.